cloud. Great.
It
Awesome.
worked great.
Yay. Thank you so much, Julie. I am thrilled to be here. I'm going to share my screen and kick us off with our presentation. And that is the PDF that I'm going to send you later. So maybe I'll do the actual PowerPoint instead. Here we go. Play from beginning. Can you guys all see my picture here? Thank you.
Sure
Welcome,
can.
everybody. I'm so pleased that you're all here. Thank you for your assist. Before we get into kind of the meat and potatoes of this meeting, I just would like to kind of ground us a little bit in what we're doing and why we're doing it. I am Marisa Anderson. I coordinate this project on behalf of the Coastal San Luis RCD. I am here in San Luis Obispo. This is a photo of my county. And I am here in the city of SLO, where I am on unceded Yakatutu Northern Chumash land. And I know you guys are a pretty dialed in audience. So I know that you know upon whose land you are at this moment. So before we really get started, let's just take a moment to think about, and I'm sure you've thought about this too, what the land that you're on right now looked like before Europeans arrived, before the settlers, before the 49ers, before the missions, before those early explorers came to our coasts and waters and lands. I know I think about this all the time, and I'm sure you do too. So with that, let's just take a moment to ground into that for just a sec. And if I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and put both your feet on the ground, if you want to turn off your video, that's great. And really what I'd like you to do is take a deep breath in your nose and hold it for a moment, and then just feel it in your belly and exhale it, and just feel the bottoms of your feet going into the ground. And this is where we are rooted right now, in this very particular place. And this is why we are here, because we love the land and its bounty and the wildlife and all that comes with it, including the people, of course. So thank you for sitting with me through that. I love a good deep breath and exhale. And with that, we will get started. So this is our project area for the Central Coast Vegetation Mapping Project. Our goal is to map with a fine scale level the land in this area of the three counties, San Luis Obispo, Monterey, and San Benito. You can see this crosshatched area is a little bit of what I've been calling an expansion area that we tacked on because it is part of multiple counties, also in the Central Coast bioregion, going from Santa Barbara and even a tiny bit of Kern County all the way up to Solano County in the Bay, as you can see there. These shaded green areas are places that have already been mapped. So, but right here, this is the area that we're talking about, this main region of SLO, Monterey, and San Benito counties. And here's really our overview of what we're doing today. I'm going to introduce the team. We're going to talk about the sampling field season, which is kicking off this week with Julie and Paul, and then mapping updates with Mark and Eddie. Rochelle will share a CDFW statewide update, and then we'll share a survey for you to take at the end and answer all of your questions. Since we have a bit of a presentation going here, if you could just jot down, or if you want to use the chat function to enter a question, I would really appreciate that. And also, I don't think we need to answer questions going through. Okay, so with that, I'd like to introduce you to Mark Tuckman of Tuckman Geospatial, LLC, along with Eddie Fitzsimmons, also of Tuckman Geospatial. We have Julie Evans here today from the California Native Plant Society, as well as Paul Escoffier with CMPS. And finally, we have Rochelle Boole from the VegCAMP offices at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we are thrilled to have everybody here. Thank you so much. So here's our core team. We are also 4 different RCDs in this 3-county area. Our RCD, Coastal San Luis, Upper Salinas, Las Tablas, Monterey County, and San Benito County each have their own RCDs. I already mentioned Tuckman Geospatial, but I'd be remiss without also giving a call out to Cass Green and Associates. Cass could not be here today, but we are really, really thrilled. And also we have an excellent funding partner in the State Coastal Conservancy, and we'll get to that. And I'm going to move this thing right here. Here you go. So speaking of our funders, none of this would be possible without the state government and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as the State Coastal Conservancy has provided generous funding for some of the sampling. And then there's a proposal for some further funding. Nothing is done yet, but it is wonderful to cross our fingers and toes. And then also we'd like to thank the USGS 3DEP program. 3DEP stands for 3D Elevation Program, and also the California Natural Resources. So, and we'd love to hear others. So we're going to talk about that as we get going. Is my slide gonna promote? Maybe not. There we go. So why are we doing this? I'm definitely not going to read this slide to you, don't worry. But my training is as a forester, and there's a saying in forestry that you can't manage what you don't measure. And so right now we just don't have a really great constructive use of fine scale vegetation mapping and topography mapping for large landscape areas. And as we know, with our current climate crisis, we need to think on a regional basis. So here's a few examples of this. And there are a lot of vegetation maps out there, but they're not always at the same scale, or they're out of date. And we'll see the coarseness. So this is an example of vegetation mapping that Tuckman Geospatial and CDFW have done. And you can see from the same snapshot of the same area in Sonoma County on the left how coarse it is versus on the right and how many more classes and descriptions we have. So as we know, unfortunately, a good portion of Monterey County has burned since 2013. And then there's been lots of other land changes from drought. And it's very difficult to know how to prioritize funding. How do you justify using public funding in the most applicable way for the greatest good? You can tell I'm a forester. Here's another great example of LiDAR. So we have our 1 to 24,000 USGS topo map, the same place, a hillshade from Q2 LiDAR, which is quality 2 LiDAR, versus an even higher quality LiDAR all the way to the right. And as an example of that, you can really see how different this data will be updated. And just imagine trying to model anything with inexact stream channels here. Similarly, when we're looking at fuels and land fire fuels, the coarsest that we have is 30 meters for the state, but coming down to 5-meter fuel levels will be amazing to have that type of imagery available and data available, again, on a landscape level scale for the entirety of the Central Coast region. And what we're really, this is the part that we're trying to fund right now. I don't need to tell you, a bunch of conservation professionals, how this data is going to be used. Anything that we try to do in an RCD, you need excellent data from. Any kind of modeling that you'd like. I love the phrase from I think it was the early days of the internet, of GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have really great data going into a model, of course, you're not going to get very great data out. And then refining those models over time. So here, who uses this data? This is a poll that was taken from Sonoma users. And I just have a quick poll here for you. Why is my polling session inactive? Huh, that's so weird because it worked earlier. I'm not going to worry about it. It was basically a poll to ask where you were. And we probably have that data from your emails. My slides want to promote. Here we go. So this is the schedule where we are right now. I can tell you that Tuckman Geospatial has been hitting all of these estimated delivery dates, even early sometimes, which is just astounding. I don't know how you do it, Mark and Eddie, and you can see quite a few 2024 dates, a draft mapping key, and field forms and permits, as well as some of the enhanced life form later in this year. So we're going to be requesting some of your input on some of these. You can also see that we do need a little bit more funding for the final fine scale maps. The funding we have takes us through a draft fine scale map by March 2026. And then we don't have any of the LiDAR deliverables, which we'll get into in a moment. Topography, forest structure, I already mentioned fuel hazard, but also a wildfire hazard and wildfire risk to structures. So again, here's a different way of looking at our data projects with a bit of a color key here. We do have the vegetation sampling, classification, and keys funded, as well as the vegetation maps, with the exception of the very final map for the fine scale map. And we're looking to fund these topics in the middle. So with that, I am going to pass the baton to Julie Evans. And one thing I wanted to mention before I do so is that this meeting is being recorded. You'll receive an email afterwards with it and some notes and these slides. So this is a 2-hour meeting. If you have to, feel free to walk about the cabin. All of this will be recorded and you can come back to it. Okay, thanks, Julie. I forgot to mention that at the top.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I've been admitting people as we go, and I'll pass that off to you, and then we can do that vice versa. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. As Marisha said, there's many components to the work that we're doing. And in the work on vegetation sampling, there are a number of components of the work that we do, from collecting the data on the ground to doing the analysis back here in the office in which I reside right now in Sacramento. So with the next slide, Marisha, will you be advancing too? Yeah, great, thank you. So we have dozens of people that are getting out in the field to collect new vegetation samples, as well as to harvest existing vegetation data. And that photo was from this past year, and we're getting back out there. Basically, this week is our first week back out in the field from all of the rainy season to start to collect a representative set of samples across the Monterey and San Luis Obispo area as our team of CNPS, and then UC Santa Cruz is working in San Benito County. So that's the first part, is getting a good data set in hand so that we can best represent all of the different variation of vegetation from coastal all the way to inland. And then from all of those points on the map, what we do is we take all those points on a map together and then analyze that information and develop a full classification list, so that each point then is then seen and the floristic information is analyzed to put names on those points. And after that, all those names on the points, then after that, then what we do is we develop a classification list, and we denote, such as this example from our most recent project in Santa Cruz, Santa Clara County, where we denote how many surveys we had of the different vegetation assemblages that we were able to document, and how many others do we know that are out there based on other areas that we've sampled. And we develop what's called a a vegetation key, similar to if you were keying out a plant species and a botanist was using a plant key. We do the same thing and develop a vegetation key that has rules for where you'd have this vegetation type versus that.
So bad. I was wondering.
And so that is the kind of like a quick key. And then the additional thing that we do is we develop a set of vegetation descriptions that are localized from the data from the region that we are doing the project. And this is just an example, again, from Santa Cruz, Santa Clara, and what we would similarly be producing here in Monterey, San Benito, and San Luis Obispo counties. This happens in collaboration with many staff and with many partners. The staff that we have are centralized in the Central Coast. That includes not only the work as me, Julie, as the project manager, but also Paul Scoffier and many other coordinators and field staff of CNPS and our partners, including Alt House and Mead as a local consulting firm. Cal Poly SLO, we have assisting us with collecting of herbarium specimens, and also our local chapters such as the CNPS San Luis Obispo chapter. And then here's some photos that just show all this effort that's happened over the last year that we're continuing as a 2-year sampling effort. In these 2 years, we, in the past year, leading into this year, our goal is to collect 2,000 representative vegetation samples. Those samples help us in understanding what is the variation across the landscape of the different plant communities. That information helps us in then translating that information that will go into the vegetation mapping. And then the herbarium specimens also help us in showing the floristic diversity, and that information then is housed, such as will be housed at the Hoover Herbarium there at Cal Poly SLO. And our work that we do on the ground, the 2 main sampling techniques that we use are what is called the CDFW and CNPS Vegetation Rapid Assessment and Releve Protocol. These 2 methods combined into one in a protocol in a field form includes a plot-based technique and a stand-based technique. They both are similar in that we do representative sampling of what is the species composition in the different patches of whether it be upland and riparian or wetland vegetation. And we're collecting a suite of plant species and structural components, as well as environmental setting, site history, cover by layer and cover by species, and other arrangement of information. In plots, we collect a full plant list in a representative area, and those representative areas vary depending on the type of species that are arranged in the plots, such as herbaceous, shrubland, or woodland plots. And then in a rapid assessment, very similar to Releve, we're representing a vegetation patch or an assemblage. And this is a little bit more rapid in that we, instead of setting up designated boundaries for a plot, we set up either a radius or a length and a width to represent the main features that we see within the landscape. And we represent repeated patterning of vegetation across any regional area. And usually in a rapid assessment, it can be any variable radius, such as 20-meter radius for an upland stand or greater, or whatever that sinuous nature of a plant community might be. So those are the main techniques that we use. And then ultimately what we are utilizing is the National Vegetation Classification System as a way to organize the plant communities at the floristic level, such as the lower levels, is what we are going to be identifying, especially at this local level, where in San Luis Obispo County, for example, there are specific examples of Sargent cypress or Hesperocypress sargentii. We will be getting at that very localized association level of what is the range and variation of the alliances of vegetation within the given region. And then those lower units can be grouped up into the National Vegetation Classification higher and higher into groups, macro groups, on up all the way to the class level. It's very similar to a species classification as a vegetation classification. And how do we do this work that we have set out to do of collecting 2,000 surveys in a short amount of time? We are employing the Esri tools of ArcGIS Online, or AGOL, and there's kind of three main tools that we use. We use a planning map that helps guide us in the field work that we do as staff and other partners. And that planning map then gets used as a survey collection tool in what's called field maps. And once we get out in the field and we're collecting data using ArcGIS Online forms such as Survey 123, then we can track the progress of our sampling using tools such as a tracking dashboard. And that tracking dashboard helps show us our targets that we've made for alliances and associations of vegetation. And how many do we still need to collect of representative samples across the study area, paying close attention to distributing those samples across the landscape. The more common types we want to get sampled across the entire region, and then pinpointing where we need to collect those rare vegetation types that occur in very localized areas. Then we also use what's called a QC dashboard to ensure that the data integrity of all the data that we're collecting, and we're previewing that information that gets then generated into the data analysis. And this newer digital system has been developed really over the last year or so, with this project at the forefront of this kind of the digital era of data collection that we have. And then additional to that, on the next slide, what we also use in order to gauge where we're going to sample is what's called a sample allocation. This sample allocation, a portion of it was provided to us by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's VegCAMP program, in which they used medium scale vegetation data from CalVeg, along with other GIS layers, to stratify the landscape to make sure that we're distributing samples of all the main community types across all of the known accessible areas of the study area, the 3-county area and beyond. So they stratified across tree, shrub, and herb types, and then very localized into the main buckets of types. And then what we also want to ensure is that as we get additional land access, hopefully to public and as well as private lands, we're able to also collect representative samples that include the common as well as the more rare or sensitive plant communities. If you go back just to show the slide, before this, as an example, this week our staff are out at Fort Ord National Monument. And so the points kind of in the center of this map, that's where they're going, and they're using all of those points from the sample allocation to guide them to get representative samples. And then they also do targeted sampling as they go to ensure that we're collecting a representation of the patterns of vegetation across the landscape. All right. What we also are seeing is that the sensitive natural communities that we are working on is describing new types that we haven't yet described yet. The data collection that we're doing, if you go one slide back, Marisha, there are some vegetation types that are only known from the study area, and they're yet to be described until we get on the ground and collect representative samples of those specialized community types, such as ones that are specialized based on specific geologic or soils, such as these chaparral communities that we are documenting now in San Luis Obispo County, which are ultimately called sensitive natural communities because they're restricted in range and or acreage and only really found in the Central Coast region. All of that information that we collect in the vegetation data set will help us and describe the diversity of vegetation, the rarity, and better understand which types are common versus which types are rare. And this information can be used to help in prioritizing habitats for conservation, easements, lands, and open space. Can be the information that we collect can be used to help in modeling and managing for impacts such as invasive plant species or other disturbances. And the information can help in prioritizing treatments such as prescribed fire, invasive plant or pest removal, utilizing grazing or other treatments to help in ensuring the ecological integrity of the diversity of plant communities that are found within the ecoregion. And then also, ultimately for this project, we'll be utilizing the data for consistently mapping the plant community types across this entire region, and will be used, we hope, for monitoring over space and time. So that's kind of like the underpinnings, and then I'm going to hand it off now to Paul.
Great, thanks, Julie. So I'm going to talk about surveys we did over the past year and hopefully where we're going this year, and then some opportunities for interested folks to participate in this effort. So the surveys that have been collected so far are part of a collaborative effort. It's not just CNPS. In Monterey and San Luis Obispo counties, we had a lot of help from Althouse and Mead, a local consulting firm who collected 105 surveys in the past year and will be collecting more this year. Our San Luis Obispo chapter of CNPS went out all on their own and collected 9 surveys this year, in addition to a bunch that they've collected in previous years, and also in addition to going out with CNPS staff and helping collect surveys that we're counting in our 738 that we did last year. So taking a little bit of credit for their work there too. In San Benito County, UC Santa Cruz, folks working through the Arboretum are in charge of getting out there and getting surveys for this project. They are planning to mostly do that in earnest this year. Last year, they were mostly focused on the rest of that Central Coast Range and, Central Coast and Coast Range ecoregion that's outside of the 3-county area. But this year being the final year for San Benito County, that'll be more of a focus. Yeah, could get next slide, great. Here is a breakdown of where we went last year by number of surveys. And these are just the top 10, because I don't want to be here all day. But we collected 311 surveys on national forest land. The Monterey Ranger District was a great help in getting us out into Big Sur. There are a bunch of road issues due to the fires and crazy rainfall years we've had over the past half decade. So we wouldn't have gotten even a fraction of that many surveys without their assistance in getting us out there. But clearly, looking at the map, you can see there's still quite a bit left to do on national forest land. So hopefully we'll be back out there more this year. We did 159 surveys on various private ranches. Land Conservancy of SLO was a big help in facilitating communication between us and various private landowners. So big thanks to them. Althouse and Mead also had connections to various landowners and got the ability to access some places for surveys through those. We did 45 surveys in state parks, primarily in the Monterey District and Oceano District, and hopefully be doing more in the San Luis Coast District this year. The Santa Lucia Preserve allowed our crews access for a week last summer, and they got 44 surveys in there. Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District also was very helpful in providing access, and we got 43 surveys on their lands. Monterey County Water Resources, who control Lake Nacimiento and Lake San Antonio, we did 35 surveys there. San Luis Obispo County parks, we got 37 surveys. That's mostly Santa Margarita Lake and Lopez Lake, the land surrounding those. And then on lands that the Land Conservancy of San Luis Obispo County owns themselves, we also got an additional 34 surveys. So that's just a brief overview. There's several other agencies who were very helpful. And yeah, just a glance at what we've done so far. Now for 2024, this is going to be like a little wish list of places we're hoping to get out to that we haven't secured access to. So if you have any, if you work for an agency that has some land out here, or if you know some landowners in these places, or if you are a landowner in these places, please reach out. There is a QR code on screen that my face might be covering, but I will also put a survey link in the chat where you can let us know if you have any good leads for access for these areas. So Maurice, if you could advance one. Is it working? Yay. Yeah, so the first big region where we kind of have no great leads right now is the Shalom Hills and Southern Diablo Range, sort of spanning that northeastern SLO County and southeastern Monterey County area. Be great to get into there. Moving north, gonna sort of go clockwise through the region. The Salinas River Valley, Sierra de Salinas, the western slope of the Gabilan Range. If you have any leads out there, that would be great too. Yeah, Elkhorn Slough. We'd like to get some salt marsh surveys and also some of the upland vegetation that exists in little relics among the ag fields out there. So yeah, any leads would be appreciated. Moving clockwise, is that clock? No, that's counterclockwise. Down south, the north coast of San Luis Obispo County and the Santa Lucia Range, sort of outside of the national forests. Any leads out there would be greatly appreciated. Next one, Diablo Canyon. We're still trying to secure access out there. There's a bunch of really unique coastal bluff habitat that would be great to be able to have represented in our survey samples. So yeah, that's a big wish list item. And then rounding it out, the Edna Valley and Wasna area, again, mostly private. Any leads out there would be appreciated. And then sort of more broadly, if you have any intel on where to find some nice perennial grasslands, ideally somewhat sizable ones, that would be a great help. When we're planning our survey campaigns, it can be pretty hard to tell just from aerial imagery whether a grassland is just another mostly non-native weedy grassland, or if it's a nice purple needle grass or California oak grass or this or that. And so, yeah, any intel you can provide on some good perennial grassland spots, either in these areas or outside. I live in San Luis Obispo, so I have the immediate vicinity of SLO kind of covered in my head. But if you know anything outside of that area and feel like sharing, that could help our crews be much more effective. Okay, great. And I'm going to talk real quick about opportunities for engagement. Again, thanks to the SLO chapter for their help surveying this year. We're going to try to incorporate the local chapters more in this coming season. If you are a college or university professor and would maybe like one of our staff or a couple of our staff to come and give a demo of our field methods, or do a little workshop for you, feel free to reach out. We'd love to do that. We're planning to have a vegathon, date and time TBD, where interested folks can come out for a day or two and sort of do a bio blitz for plant communities. Potentially we'll do that in either southern Big Sur or out towards Carrizo Plain. Those are the two things we're thinking of right now, but none of that's nailed down yet. But if you want to be notified, there's a place you can put your contact info in the survey again. And then we're also going to try to incorporate field days in Monterey and SLO counties, sort of alternate months, where folks can come out for a day or half a day with our field crews and sort of see what everything's all about, and maybe cross-pollinate with some local knowledge that you may have or some botanical knowledge that they might have. That'd be great. Yeah, so if any of that sounds of interest to you and you'd like to be contacted about opportunities, again, please fill out the survey. Thanks. And that is all I have. So back to Marisa.
Thank you so much, Paul. I am going to pass this baton to Mark Tuckman to talk about our mapping updates.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I hear you great.
All right,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah,
Thanks. Thanks for the great Paul and Julie and Marisha presentations. This is just an update on the vegetation mapping that follows like a puzzle piece with all the work that CNPS is doing, all the surveys that they're collecting to characterize the vegetation on the landscape. All that information will be used to make vegetation maps, fine scale vegetation maps across the 3-county area. And then also as part of that effort, an enhanced life form map, which is less floristically detailed, and I'm going to get into this. Before I do, I just wanted to say hello, and it's great to be here. And this project is really exciting for our team to be involved with. We're lucky to get to do this work, and we love it. I just wanted to mention we have this great group of mappers who come from different backgrounds. We have foresters and botanists and wetlands people, and sort of this multidisciplinary group that loves to map vegetation. And I want to mention the folks, Julia Murphy, Tyler McCarthy, Brittany Burnett, and most recently, Brian Crabb and Laura Askim, who we're lucky to have, who joined us with many years of veg mapping experience. And here in Forestville as well, Dylan Loudon and Eddie, who you'll be hearing from in a couple of minutes. And I sure hope I didn't leave anyone out. Eddie, if I did, maybe you can mention them.
Elliot Kuskalis.
Oh yeah, of course, Elliot. Amazing mapper. So thanks to my team for doing this great work, and our amazing partners who are CNPS and Aerial Information Systems, AIS, who do incredible work and will be doing the fine scale mapping in San Luis Obispo County with us on this project. So we're really excited to continue our partnership with AIS. So let me keep going here. We're sorry to. So here's the schedule for our veg mapping deliverables. We're right now working on the enhanced life form map. I'm going to show what that is in a few minutes. We're going to be done with Monterey County in the summer in July, and SLO and San Benito County in November for the enhanced life form. We have this extra area that Marisha showed with the cross hatching. That area will be mapping also to enhanced life form by by the March of 26. And then the fine scale draft maps for the 3 counties, the draft map is scheduled for early 2026. You can go ahead to the next one. So this is the workflow that we use, that we've developed over lots of years of doing veg mapping. We start by creating that enhanced life form map, which is floristically much less detailed than the fine scale veg map that you can see on the bottom. So in the enhanced life form map, we're mapping forests to these broad classes: evergreen hardwood, deciduous hardwood, whereas in the fine scale map, we're mapping in woody types mainly to the NVC alliance. So classes like within deciduous hardwood, like Blue Oak Alliance, the Valley Oak Alliance, the Oregon White Oak or Black Oak Alliances. And you can see in between those maps in this diagram, the steps that we employ to do the mapping. So we use a combination of different software, e-cognition, and machine learning, combined with lots of field data to create the enhanced life form map, combined with lots of image interpretation of manual editing to create the enhanced life form map, and then tons of field data, our own field data, plus all of the data that the survey data, the releves and rapid assessments that CNPS collects. Again, use machine learning and lots of human aerial image interpretation to create the fine scale veg map. And the fine scale veg map is a polygon map, and the polygons have obviously information about their vegetation community type, but also information about their structure, things like their relative conifer cover, the relative hardwood cover, the shrub cover in the stand, the canopy height that we get out of the LiDAR data, the canopy density that we also get from LiDAR, and other attributes. So it's lots of information in this polygon map. You can go to the next one. This is an example of the enhanced life form map. And this looks like San Mateo County, maybe, or Santa Cruz County. But you can see from the legend, the more Santa Cruz County, the more general classes. So there's about 20, 25 classes in the enhanced life form map. And if you go to the next slide, this is an example of the enhanced life form map for Santa Clara County. And again, this is a semi-automated process. So we use imagery like NAPE, and if the county has other types of imagery, we will use that. But we use 4 bands of imagery, so including near infrared. We also use moderate resolution imagery in our machine learning. So we have other spectral bands besides just the near infrared. And we use e-cognition to create the enhanced life form map, followed by lots of manual editing. And again, the floristically general 25 classes. So you can go to the next slide, Marisha. And then we use that enhanced life form map, which we'll release publicly when we're done with it. And we use it as a foundation to sort of build the much more floristically detailed fine scale vegetation map. And this is an example from San Mateo County. And it illustrates sort of the depth of information for vegetation. So many classes. I think there's 106 classes in this map, down to, in many cases, at least for woody types, to the Alliance level of the National Vegetation Classification. And again, we can't do this without that CNPS work, the collection of those surveys, the analysis of those surveys to create a classification. that's good for that one. Again, just to reiterate the methods for this fine scale vegetation mapping, we use that enhanced life form map as an input. Imagery, the QL1 LiDAR, and derivatives from the LiDAR, lots of field data, lots of our own field work, and Trimble eCognition, machine learning, manual editing. Our maps adhere to the NVCS, the National Vegetation Classification System, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife's vegetation mapping protocols. So next slide. This is just a summary of the minimum mapping units for both the enhanced life form and the fine scale maps. As you can see, there's different mapping units for different feature types. For example, agriculture, we're mapping to a 1/4 acre. Developed areas, we're mapping to 1/5 of an acre, and water, we're mapping to 400 square feet. The vegetation there's nuance in the minimum mapping units, but generally speaking, for upland classes, a 1/2 an acre MMU. For woody classes, for riparian and wetland classes, a 1/4 acre MMU. And I won't go into the contrasting life form right now, but when we get closer to the time of really digging into the methods of the mapping, which will happen in later workshops, we'll provide more information about sort of the way that we're making the maps, and we'll also be asking for information from you about, what we're missing, where the map is wrong, and where you can provide input about the acres of land that you know well, and that you can point us in the right direction if we didn't get it right. So the data sets that we're creating for the 3 counties, the enhanced life form map, the fine scale maps, and any other sort of byproducts of the work that we think are going to be useful to folks, we'll put on this pacificvegmap.org, which has on it now the data sets that we've created for other counties in the region. The fine scale vegetation maps will eventually end up on the BIOS, on CDFW's BIOS. But here we've got all kinds of other data like LiDAR derivatives and other data sets. So it's a nice, easy way to go to this website, grab a feature service, grab a file geodatabase of something that you might need. So that's all. Again, that was, I realized, a little bit short. And stay tuned for deeper updates in the future. We were really hoping at this meeting to focus on trying to get input from folks on how we could get land access. So that's really a big deal for us today. I'm not going to spend any more time talking about methods. I'm happy to answer questions, but we did want to have Eddie just show, just kind of have a look at what the team is working on now with their manual editing of the enhanced life form map. So I'm going to pass it over to Eddie, and I'll be back in a few minutes. So
Thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. Let me get this working. Live demonstrations always work the first shot, so I'm sure this is gonna go fine. My name's Eddie Fitzsimmons. I'm the project manager on the Central Coast Enhanced Life Form Maps and Fine Scale Vegetation Maps. My role here is mostly for oversight and QA/QC and general project management. I do want to shout out again Elliot Kuskalis, Brittany Burnett, Tyler McCarthy, and Julia Murphy, and Dylan Adden, who have done a lot of the groundwork on this to get this wonderful map going. I'm just going to give you a little peek at our ArcGIS Pro project, kind of the schema, some of the reference data we use, and just like a little bit of a insight on our workflow. So I have two maps set up here. The left map shows our draft enhanced life form polygons. These are representative of the vegetation below them. The imagery you're seeing on the left is 2022 NAPE imagery. All of our geometry of the polygons, all the shapes you see are meant or do adhere to the 2022 NAPE imagery. On the right, we have the same enhanced life form polygons, but symbolized differently. We see them as solid colors, and that just kind of helps us have a better overview of what's going on. You know, we do have these labeled on the left, but it's just kind of easier to see these very easy to interpret colors. I'll just go over a little bit of the data that we use to help make these wonderful maps. Kind of our first internal thing is we have a what we call a tracking tile service, and this is what we use. These little squares is what we use to track our progress. So after an editor has finished editing one of these squares, they change the status to edited, and then I know that it's ready to go, and I will go over and QA/QC it. Quality control. And then we have some of our kind of internal and shared point services. So this field observation points is kind of a new thing we're using, actually newly multi-agency data collection service. Point data kind of meant for the perspective of a mapper. Scale is, a little bit bigger. We're mostly focused on, quarter acre for some things, but most of these points represent things that are around like at least half an acre. So we know that if this data is collected, that means that it fits our minimum mapping unit. We have review points, just an internal service we use to kind of QA/QC other folks' work. And then our field validation targets is what we use to identify areas where we need to go in the field to verify data, just ground truthing. And we use this, and CNPS uses it a little bit for us as well, because they're so kind to help us out. We have our existing vegetation data. If you see anything in here that you think is missing, any map that is in Monterey, please let me know. But we try to incorporate all existing vegetation maps in the area. We have a separate service that we use to track, like, if it's in our little region that we're editing. So I do have them all in this map. There's none are in this area that we're looking at right now. We have our point data, which is a mix of sources. We any data the CDFW is passed along to us, we'll incorporate, such as this Pinnacles point data. We use very sparingly, we use iNaturalist points. We don't base any of our calls off of iNaturalist points. They're mostly out there because they have photos. And there's a lot of spots where if we're doing photo interpretation, any sort of ground photo is extremely helpful. So as much as we love Forbes, we're not really super interested in the Clarkia, but if I were to click on this point and observe the photo, there might be a chance that it's showing me the trees around it, and then I could confirm that it's Quercus sacrofolia around it. We use all of the Consortium of California Barrier CNDD points. Again, another thing we don't rely on super heavily, but they are there to help inform decisions. I think, we definitely take more truth from more recent points, but there are a lot of older points in here as well. We have all the work that CNPS is doing right now. They're like live service, so data that they collect in the field and they upload will show up in our map. And then we have all of the existing data that CNPS has created in any of their previous projects prior to the Central Coast work. We have some other reference data. We have incorporated the Department of Water Resources crop mapping or statewide crop map into here. Some of it we just take the geometry directly, and some of it we use their calls to help inform some of our decisions. Stream center lines, we they help inform riparian calls. We have our Central Coast major roads, which is just another layer or another map class that is burned in the map. It's highways and primary and secondary roads get labeled as major roads. We have ultramafic areas, and then the FRAPS fire data. And then as you can see below, we have this little group called imagery. So we have our 2022 NAEP imagery, but we also use the last 8 years of NAEP as reference data. Some vegetation just pops more in other data sets, or maybe, there's some shadows in the 2022, but if I look in 2020, it's a nice, great, clear shot. We also use Google Earth, multiple years of Google Earth imagery to help inform calls. We use Google Street View, Bing Bird's Eye, sort of any bit of reference data out there we use to help inform our decisions. And then our last thing, kind of our main part of our workflow, is we have this mask system, which, so this is one whole tile that I have shown right here. So it's an editor would be doing one of these at a time, but there's a lot going on here. It's easy to miss things. So we use this system called a mask system and it helps us focus on what we're trying to edit. So for instance, like this, we're masking out anything that is not considered developed, and we're looking to pull out like maybe a little bit of an adjacent, like oak woodland got captured in some of these developed polygons. In that case, we would pull it out, and these masks just kind of help us do it quickly, because there's usually a lot going on. We do these for our herbaceous polygons, shrub, and then heavily rely on them for all of our forest classes. So as Mark kind of highlighted, we are in the enhanced life form stage right now, which means we have already edited the county once in the life form stage, but all of our trees are just called like a basic forest title, or eucalyptus. We include eucalyptus there because it's very easy to pull out. But then enhanced life form, our forest classes get split up into deciduous hardwood, evergreen hardwood, redwood and Doug fir. And because we've been mostly operating in the Bay Area, we're going to incorporate some other classes, some true firs into this enhanced life form class. We've got our pines, we've got our riparians, and then eucalyptus. So we'll use these to kind of further, make sure that we have got all of our forest calls right. Like I have our evergreen hardwood mask on, so all the trees that are shown should only be evergreen hardwoods. It's mostly just Quercus agrifolia. And I do see maybe like a little bit of pine up here, and the mask kind of just helps that pop out a little bit. That is we also have, we incorporate canopy height models in here. We use canopy height models all the time. But yeah, I just have a few examples of kind of more of the common edits that we do in this stage of the mapping. I do want to reiterate that this is just a draft. It'll get a couple more passes on it. So if you see some outstanding things that look incorrect, hopefully they'll be dealt with at some point. That's my job. So right here, in this stage, we are doing a lot of more upland woody vegetation edits. We have guidelines to keep folks just on a efficient timeline. It's very easy to kind of get hyper focus on one thing and spend a lot of time editing maybe less than an acre when you are responsible for the other 130 acres that are in this tile. So we have rules, for instance, like if you're going to make an edit, if it's directly adjacent to the life form, it has to be at least 1/4 of an acre. So this is one of those instances where I see some Quercus agrifolia that's right here next to what I'm gonna guess is probably chamise at this point. It looks to me that it's probably bigger than 1/4 of an acre. So I'm gonna use the split tool. The split tool is a primary tool we use, and skirt the edges of this little stand, and it's an acre. So I am gonna call this evergreen hardwood. There are there's rules for how we choose to call something evergreen over pine, over redwood, Doug fir. Those are written down. You can, any of our previous mapping efforts, you can see those rules if you're interested. But yeah, different trees have different density requirements, but for evergreen hardwood, it only has to be 50% if it's amongst other hardwoods. So that is a great edit that should be included in the map. Got another one where these are kind of more common things, like on the borders of kind of in WUI areas, we start maybe to see like a little bit of like forests that we would like to be classified to get omitted. Sometimes they get called developed in the machine learning, sometimes they get called shrub, but this is just a little one that is probably closer to more of a quarter of an acre or half an acre. But this is definitely a worthwhile edit. Yeah. So it's just kind of right in the middle of our threshold, but definitely should be included. So yeah, it's just another kind of occurrence of that where probably got some shorter live oak that maybe gave the machine learning a little bit of trouble, and it's probably right on the border of our minimum mapping unit. Take a look. Yeah, so it's exactly half an acre, and depends on if I drew that differently, it could have been just called shrub, but definitely something that we want to include. See, another thing that is kind of common is that we may have like pretty stands of evergreen hardwood like mixed in with pines that definitely can are large enough to be their own map class. This is one of those instances where on the right we have pine. I am not going to comment on what I think it is right now, but we have some. I know it's pine. One of the canopy height model definitely helps us spot that. We can see it's just much taller than everything else in the area. You could flip through a couple different years of imagery to see if there's any other characteristics that stand out. Sometimes, you know, pine will look much wispier or something like that in between imageries. But I feel pretty confident this is pine. And over here, got some shorter stuff that I believe is a hardwood, and it's just a little bit greater than an acre, which means it is large enough to be called its own thing. So we're going to flip this attribute over to evergreen hardwood. Another common edit we make. Got a lot of, yeah, kind of same thing. Sometimes the machine learning will just blend the edges a little bit. So I think by our rules, this definitely is a shrub polygon. The trees have to be less than 10%, which I believe they are in this polygon, but I still think that these trees are special and should be included in the other adjacent forest polygons. So it looks like we have some pine cypress over here, but also some evergreen hardwood. And there's some evergreen hardwood just on these edges that I can edit and include with this little bit that I pulled out. And call that. And so that's a nice acre and a half. It's definitely the stuff we don't want to miss. You know, we want to get everything right, but we absolutely want to get everything over a half acre right. And then kind of some other stuff we see. These are maybe a little bit lower priority edits for us. We try to, you know, time out these tiles where we focus on the most important things, but there are plenty of other kind of smaller edits that we would like to include in one of the passes we do over this. And in this instance, there's just like a little bit of manzanita that got included in this Quercus agrifolia polygon. This is probably about a third of an acre, which meets our rule of over greater than a quarter of an acre. Yeah, so another 0.37. So flip that over to shrub. Yeah, so those are kind of our most common edits for the enhanced life form process. We are still doing some like making edits to developed areas. We focus a lot on riparian forests on this pass. Everything still gets edited, but we just have more of a focus on the trees on this one. Here's another. It's great to have this map over because it's really easy for me to see that this little developed area accidentally got called evergreen hardwood. But yeah, that is all I have for the little live demo, and I will send it back to you, Mark. I can.
We are finding Mark. Let me.
I'm here. Thanks. Thanks, Eddie.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
amazing, Eddie.
Yeah, thank you for that demo.
Yeah.
Wow. Here we go. Resharing my screen. And Mark, you're up.
All right. Great. Oh, I gotta turn my camera on. I just wanted to give an update on some of the other data sets that we are hoping to develop in this project. These are a set of wildfire products and LiDAR derivatives. And let's go to the next slide, I'd say, Marisha. Yeah, so many of you know that the entire central coast, the 3 counties and actually adjacent areas too, will have LiDAR coverage, so there'll be full LiDAR coverage. The USGS collected the point clouds for all the gap areas in 2023. So that full coverage now gives us the opportunity to create a set of LiDAR derivatives that really are helpful. The LiDAR point cloud itself is hard to use unless you have specialized software and sort of analysts that know how to use it. But the derivatives are super useful for land managers. Things like slope aspect, the hill shade, canopy height model, canopy density, contour, elevation contours, other forest structure attributes, super useful for all manner of land management applications. So we are really excited to work towards getting those derivatives created and getting them publicly available on Pacific VegCAMP. So that's something that Mauricia is working hard on, and the RCDs are working hard on, and we're hoping to have some good news there soon. So I'll leave it at that, and maybe we can go to the next slide. This is just an example of some of these derivatives. So the hill shade, for example, is super useful. There's an example of that here on the slide. You can use it for lots of things. It really lays bare the topography. It lets you see roads and trails, even if they're under the canopy. It's really useful. Other topographic derivatives are the DTM, the digital terrain model, the digital surface model, the slope data, the aspect data, and those are the main ones. We can go to the next slide. One of the other data sets is an impervious surfaces map, which uses both the LiDAR and the imagery to create it. This is actually work that we've done in numerous counties and contracted the work to the University of Vermont Spatial Analysis Lab. And tragically, our great collaborator there passed away this winter, Jarlath O'Neill Dunn, who is an amazing human and has done great work for us over the years. So we're very sad and sorry to have lost Jarlath. But the impervious surfaces map is useful for lots of land management applications, especially for wildfire hazard and risk mapping, which is one of the main applications that we use it for. Next slide. This is another LiDAR derivative, the ladder fuel density derivative that, again, since the LiDAR point cloud penetrates the canopy and can sort of measure the density of vegetation below the canopy, it's useful for identifying areas that have a high density of fuel between 1 and 4 meters above the ground, which is what we call our ladder fuel proxy. So that's another derivative that we'd love to create for the 3 counties. The next slide shows a 5-meter fuel model. This harkens back to the slide that Marisha showed earlier in the presentation that compared the land fire to 5-meter fuel model. The 5-meter fuel model is derived from the enhanced life form map and that stack of LiDAR derivatives. The inputs to FlamMap, the inputs to fire behavior models include the 5-meter fuel model, and then things like canopy height, canopy density, canopy base height. And we can derive those things from LiDAR and have a more resolute fuel model and improve sort of all the components of those inputs to the fire behavior models over land fire. And so we're excited to see that happen in these 3 counties. Next slide. And then the last thing that I'll show for sort of the wildfire hazard and risk to structures work, which is something we've been doing in the region as we create these LiDAR derivatives and the enhanced life form and the 5-meter fuel model, and we're able to also create this wildfire risk to structures map, which is useful for identifying the areas of the landscape that have both high wildfire hazard and the presence of structures, which we can map well using the LiDAR data. So next slide. Just a few notes on what makes these large projects possible when they weren't possible not that long ago. The costs of imagery and LiDAR data are coming down. It's way just the leaps and bounds of processing power. The ability to work within the sort of, leverage the amazing expertise of, the CNPS group, which is collecting, high quality data, doing amazing analysis on that data, handing us, the classifications we need to make these maps. CDFW for having the vision to do the work, seeing the importance of mapping vegetation, having a program and a protocol and a standard for doing so. And then having, for the fuels and firework, having the Scott and Bergen classification to work with. The technological advancements that we've seen over the past several years for things like image segmentation, object-based image analysis, machine learning and deep learning, and then, being able to use like field maps and being able to, everything's just, the tools are getting better and better. We're using Python all the time for our workflow. So our entire sort of workflow from beginning to end is glued together by, I don't know, dozens of Python scripts that we've developed and refined and iterated and improved over a lot of time. So that adds efficiency to our work. We love that we can make the products accessible and make them public. Everything that we do for our clients, unless the client has a strong reason to not, is made public. The economies of scale from that cross-organizational region-wide collaboration where, maybe like someone's got a little funding over here to do some veg mapping, and then building a consortium from a few folks and then widening it and achieving those economies of scale and scope that come with cooperation and collaboration. That's just a summary of some of the things, and I guess we go to the next slide. Some of the applications for the data sets. These are just a couple of examples, and I think these are slides that Danny Franco made. Thanks, Danny. And this is in Sonoma County, we did a lot of work after the 2017 fires, looking at the fire effects of those large fires. We used the vegetation map. That was a key sort of input to the analysis, as was the LiDAR. And it really helped us look at what were the factors that affected fire behavior? What were those vegetation types that were affected different? How are vegetation types affected differently? It was interesting to see how that ladder fuel metric was really important and as a highly correlated to canopy damage. And actually, we're doing a similar project now on the CZU fires in Santa Cruz County, looking at, again, using the vegetation map, using the LiDAR. Now we have pre and post fire LiDAR in Santa Cruz County, again, to assess sort of fire effects, to see really, to create really detailed maps of canopy damage, look at the impacts by vegetation type of the fires. Also helped to provide the DOC with right after the fire, actually weeks after the fire, with brand new LiDAR to use for their WERT assessments on that fire. Let's see, next slide. This is work that, again, Danny Franco, thanks for Danny for providing these. I don't think Danny's here today, but he's the One TAM and Danny and Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy have done amazing work in this forest health assessment for Marin County, using the vegetation map, using pre and post fire LiDAR and other data sets to assess forest health, to look at mortality, look at standing dead, and to start to prioritize treatments on the landscape using these data sets. And there's a link there to a really great report that we did produce a lot of the sort of foundational data that was used in that work. And the vegetation map for Marin that AIS and we worked on was important in that work. So let's go to the next one. So this is just another other examples of using the fine scale veg, the impervious surfaces, using the LiDAR point cloud to look at forest structure, creating and hydrologic applications of LiDAR to assess habitat connectivity, prioritize acquisitions. Our original work, the first kind of California real fine scale NVCS alliance level map we made was in Sonoma. And Ag and Open Space really wanted that map so that they saw it as a missing piece for them in prioritizing prioritizing conservation, on prioritizing parcels for conservation. And they used the vegetation map and the LiDAR drive forest structure to sort of identify sensitive habitats, late cereal conifer, and other things. And so we're actually hoping, we're in the process of scoping out how that map can be updated now that it's 10 years old. So that's an exciting possibility. I think that's maybe the last slide. Yeah, so we do need your help. And I think this is a good time for me to just hand it back to you, Marisha.
Thank you so much, Mark. Let me unmute myself. We do really need your input in all of these different ways. We'd really like, some training, but we want to provide training. As Mark said, all of this data is going to be freely accessible. It's publicly funded. It'll be freely available. And then we'd also wonder if you have any extra data sets that might be useful in doing this. And we'll definitely need some of your inputs, your expert on the ground inputs in the review process of these. As you can see, I love that peek behind the curtain there, Eddie. I'm just fascinated by that. And the freehand tool is also my favorite. So these are where some of our initial or some of the initial mapping projects have been done starting in 2014. This is just an incredible amount of work being done and moving forward into the future. And with that, I would like to invite Rochelle Bull of CDFW to the podium.
Thanks, Marisa. Can you guys hear me?
Excellent, yes.
All right. Well, I just wanted to thank you all for having me here. I'm Rochelle Bull. I'm the vegetation ecologist and program lead for the CDFW Vegetation Classification and Mapping Program. And we are just so honored to be working with this team here. You guys are really just such a, powerhouse of a team, and we really couldn't be happier with you all and the work that you guys are doing. As I think Marisa and Julie and Mark all mentioned, we have had the opportunity to support this work that's happening with this team in the Central Coast, but we also have since 2022 been able to receive some funding, legislative funding, to complete many projects statewide. As a program, we've been around for quite a while, since the mid-90s, but since 2022, we've received some significant funding to have some projects that are going up right now, starting right now, and some started in 2022, some started last season, and some will be starting this season. Just so you know, this Central Coast project is plugging into this whole statewide effort to classify, so sample, classify, and map vegetation communities fine scale. That's what my program is supporting statewide, and this is what this project is feeding into among these other projects. So statewide, we have this whole list of projects happening. We have mapping projects and sampling and mapping projects all over the state. I'm not going to go into them individually, but you can see here any of the tan or orange and blue are projects that we're working with many collaborators, including many of the people on the call today and on this project specifically, that are working elsewhere in the state. If you have any questions about any of these projects, please don't hesitate to reach out. But through all these projects, you can advance, Marisa. By March of 2026, most of them will be completed. We'll be collecting over 12,000 new surveys statewide, and that the surveys will be covering over 40% of the state, and adding over 16 million new acres of mapping, fine scale mapping for the state. Those gray areas already have completed survey, classification, and mapping data. So those red polygons will be adding to that. So by the end of all these projects that we have currently going, you could advance one more, Marisa. We will have basically the whole state surveyed at a fine scale, and we will be doing lots of data analysis, because as you know, I think Julie kind of touched on this, you start with data collection, you have to analyze those data to feed into the statewide and national vegetation classification systems, and only then can you do the fine scale mapping. So we will have survey data for all of the state, especially for woody vegetation, and a really good classification and alliance and association level there all over the state. And then mapping will be completed for nearly 70% of the state, and those areas that we sampled can now be mapped, and that's what's going to be happening hopefully following March of 2026. We'll continue on the projection of mapping and finishing the state. And I think that's all I wanted to give you guys, that perspective that this is an effort that's happening statewide. And we just are really fortunate to have such talented people working with us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. we've talked about this before, and especially this team, how critical this data is and how it's really a once in a generational push to get this baseline data that's already being updated in certain places. So thank you so much, Rochelle. It's just great working with all of you. So here we
Great,
are.
thank you.
Oh, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to share one more time our deliverable schedule. You can see again, wanting to get into contract from the wildfire deliverables and the final fine scale map for the 3 counties. But we have a lot of enhanced life form working. That show and tell from Eddie and Mark just really amazes me. And we'd like to keep going and move forward with this. So there's lots of opportunities for you to get involved. Again, as you could really see when Eddie was showing his screen, was that it takes that manual editing and that expert review to really make sure that this data is accurate and shines. So here again is our funding. Just another way of saying the same thing. We are really hoping to fund these middle projects. I'm sure a lot of you would be really looking forward to those as well. So we're hoping for your help in that. And finally, here's a list of some of our local contacts. I'm just coordinating this on behalf of all of the RCDs. And we really do need your help. Paul went into some locations about where we need some help doing some land access to get some of these really special plant communities that don't exist anywhere else. So if you are in any of these RCD districts, you can please contact any of our partners. Our emails are listed here. And then Paul Escoffier, who you've met, is our survey lead for this project. So always shoot him an email as well. And I just can't say enough how amazing it is to work with these incredible funders, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the CNRA, Coastal Conservancy, and the USGS. We'd love to add more logos to this and keep it going. So I just can't thank you guys enough. And this is a great time to ask for questions. And I'm going to stop sharing. We can just kind of popcorn. If you want to raise your hand, we can ask questions. I didn't see any in the chat, and we'll see who among us here is the best person to help us answer these questions. Do we have anybody? Raise your hand or go ahead and unmute yourself. Well, I'm going to give you a moment to keep thinking about it. Oh, I think I saw a hand. Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
Hi there. Thank you so much. This is unbelievable to see all this effort on our county. I just cannot wait to be using these maps, and I hope to be able to help review them. My question is, it's kind of a bit of a side question, but within the National Vegetation Classification Standard, there's the statewide enumeration of alliances that I think of as the MCV kind of collection of alliances. And then there's a separate one that my understanding is the feds have a kind of a separate list, the US NVC. And when I go through matching them up to each other, they don't always match. It seems like the US NVC ones come along when there's some kind of federal project somewhere, but there's lots of gaps in US NVC when it comes to Californian alliances. So is my understanding correct? And if so, is there an attempt here to sort of simultaneously work on both of them, especially for those of us who have work that overlaps with federal land or federal partners who presumably need to follow US NVC to some extent?
Thanks, Fred, for that question. And yes, this alignment between our local, regional, state classification and the national classification, that's what the sync up is continuing to happen as we work across these ecological regions and then at the statewide. So both Rochelle and I are working with the National Vegetation Classification folks through the Ecological Society of America's Vegetation Panel and NatureServe to continue that one-to-one matching, and where there isn't, and sometimes there isn't one-to-one matching for one reason or another. There's some explanations of why that will be as we go, but we're working towards updating our classification as we work on these projects. So the funding that we have here will help us continue that alignment.
Cool,
And
thank you.
just to add to that really quickly, I wanted to say that I would say that the MCV, or the Manual of California Vegetation, has more fine scale information for the state that will eventually feed into the NVC as well, but it's kind of a slow process to kind of get those inducted there. But we are collecting the data under their standards, and we are analyzing and developing our classification units based on their standards. And so hopefully eventually those will be aligned. But I would say if there's alliances and associations in the MCV that you don't see in the NVC, I'm not surprised, but I wouldn't be afraid to utilize those types either, because they will, you know, we're the ones collecting the data that feeds into the NVC for California. Just so you understand that connection. We are connected. We are essentially the California, node of the USNVC. And if that makes sense, or the Natural Heritage Program that supports it.
Yeah, and we're working towards some, you know, reanalysis and or analysis of new data to really work out the association level detail, where usually we have more associations that we list at the state level that the NVC slowly, as we work on these projects, that they induct as we go, but it is a slow stepwise process. And then likewise, sometimes the National Vegetation Classification sometimes has taken more of a general view at the alliance level, and that's where the sync up that we've been doing over the past few years and continuing to do to kind of like work towards that alignment. But sometimes there is that variation in taxonomy, where the state taxonomists might sometimes be at a finer scale.
Yeah, and if you ever have any questions about an alliance or association, or the veg classification in your area, the area that you are managing, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask me or Julie or anybody from our programs.
Wow, Fred, thank you for that question. I learned so much from Julie and Rochelle's answer. Like, I'm just constantly learning more about this very technical process that we all kind of have an intuitive idea of, but not data on the ground yet. We had a good question in the chat.
Did you see that?
I did. Thank you so much, Julie. Ethan asks, is it possible that LiDAR topography data will be available sooner than other LiDAR-derived projects? A simple bare earth DEM would be extremely useful. Isn't that the truth, Ethan? I'm going to hand this question to Mark Tuckman. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to let him answer it first.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a frustrating answer. So the answer is that the data has been collected, the point cloud exists, and there is for at least part of the area, for the 3 counties, the data has been collected, and it's in what's called the USGS's quarantine period, where they do their QA QC on it, and then once they've done that and approve it, then it is released. During that period, it's not accessible. That's the frustrating part of the answer. So we are in that quarantine period, and yeah, so that's, Marisha, do you have any more information beyond that you want to share?
No, I think you hit it. It is a challenging question, and I just can't. Mark and I have talked before, like, where the future of LiDAR is going, and it's just going to be amazing in another 20, 50 years. But for now, it's a little bit more technical of a process. Thank you for that question, Ethan.
And the kind of like proposed release is about when, and then, you know, what does it take to get that DM made and, you know, cost.
You know, the DTM is like the really easy to make from the point cloud. So once the data's been released, that it actually is one of the initial deliverables. So when the data is released, the DTM will be automatically available. So it's just it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be months before it's released.
I think we were looking at the fall of this year, if my
Mhm.
memory serves, but I don't quote me on that. But that's the time scale that we're looking at.
Yeah, and in the past, USGS has been less strict about sharing the preliminary point cloud, but they've really formalized their policy and made it so that, yeah, that it's just not available.
We can do what we can do. Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. And thanks again for that question, Ethan. I love this comment by Lindy Althouse. Can the public see the areas of mapping interest so we can share with our friends or landowners? That map could have the property available for mapping. That's a great question, Paul. Thank you so much for answering. Do you want to add anything to that, Paul, or?
I was just going to suggest to you that we maybe send that out to everyone with the package that goes out right after this.
That's a great idea. Yes. After we close and this meeting recording is complete, you'll all receive an email with a link to the recording, a PDF of these slides, and a little bit more information. So we can definitely include that map as its own PDF there. Thank you so much, Lindy, for suggesting that, and Paul for your idea of including it on the email afterwards. And it looks like we have a follow-up question for Fred. I'll read it aloud, and then please, anybody else that has questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hand, either literally raise your hand with your camera on or using the Zoom. Where is that Zoom application here? Raise hand. Oh gosh, so here's Fred's follow-up question. Does a field season schedule allow for field work follow-ups in situations where potential gaps are revealed after interested parties have a chance to review the draft floristic scale mapping? This is a great question too. Yeah, oh, thank you, Julie, for typing that in there. Yes, definitely, including during the mapping stage and in our partner involvement, which is why we are all here today. And the more ground data can be collected for map types that are really important to discern. Thank you, Julie, for typing that out. Does anybody else I see your hand, Jake. I'll get to that in a second, but anybody else want to chime in with that answer? I know there are some drive-by, but not maybe grassland surveys at some point. Is that correct, Mark?
Can you say that again?
We complete some drive-by surveys to double check some things.
Observation surveys, yes. And I think
That's-
Eddie might have touched upon the GIS layer, yeah.
That's something that we do at the beginning of our fine scale mapping phase, which is coming up, and we spend weeks in the field doing recon. We call it field calibration. AIS calls it field reconnaissance. So our mapping teams canvass the project area. They make observations on vegetation type, recording it on their tablets, and that data augments CNPS's survey data to give us the intelligence that we need to connect what we're seeing on the imagery and the GIS data sets with what's the vegetation types that are actually on the ground. Yeah.
Wow.
I guess I would just say that even after mapping is done, if you see that there's areas that, are underrepresented or, need to be sampled, you can always let us know too. And, we're never done sampling. We're never done surveying the state. There's always refinement that can happen. So, and Julie, can you have this field season and next, or is this the last field season?
The 2024 is our second, and the majority of the data we hope to collect. And one other thing I would say to Fred or others is that sometimes those local experts can help in providing targeted locations where they believe that, here we would like to pinpoint some important local vegetation community types that can help us get staff and or mappers in that calibration stage in the field in certain areas too. So Fred, if you want to sync up with us, that'd be great.
Cool. Yeah, maybe I'll get in touch after the meeting and with some specific syncing.
That'd be great, Fred. I can stay on for a few minutes afterwards if you'd like. We don't wrap until 3, but we have plenty of time. Thank you again for that follow-up question, Fred, and all of these answers. One of the things I wanted to drive home is that it really does take that human interface that while, we hear a lot about AI these days out in the world, and here's just an amazing application for it, but it's always followed up by iterations of expert human review. So thanks for giving us an opportunity to talk about that, Fred. Eddie, do you want to add to that at all? I know that you're a big part of that process when it begins, or are we complete?
Yeah, well, a couple other ways is we will, after we have done some initial mapping, we will go out there and do what we call validation work, which is just the ground truthing. Go out there and confirm calls, or if we have an inconsistent gap, we will go out there and try to fill it in. And then we will also flag any areas that we are just like uncertain and maybe they're also inaccessible. We'll flag those for expert review for that final round. So we will, we ask for everyone's input on that, but we also will provide selected areas where folks can review.
I think it's worth just reinforcing that, like, now's the time to fill those areas on the map that Paul showed, those blue areas. Like, the sooner we can get data collected in those places, the better the map will be. So it's critical.
Let me share that screen again. Here is this. Yeah, thank you so much. We'll make a PDF of this for everybody. Great idea. Thank you again for all of these answers. Jake, I know you've been patiently waiting with your hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Everybody, Jake Smith, Planning and Conservation Program Manager at Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District. Great presentation, just shared excitement, enthusiasm for this. Eddie, really loved kind of the behind the scenes and also a big fan of ArcGIS Pro dark mode, so glad you're there. And I might have missed this during the presentation, but I was curious, like looking at the schedule and seeing the number of things that are not funded or not under contract. I'm not sure if I totally heard exactly what the funding strategy is for those missing elements, how we can support, who's on first, and kind of like, it's better to all go together and throughout the entire planning area, but are there is, consideration of phases where it might break it up into counties or sub areas, or in the worst case scenario, could landowners potentially pay to play or kind of have some of these projects derive from this team as well? Just figuring out what the look ahead is and how we can kind of shore this thing up, because of all the eye candy continues to impress. And of course we want it all, just figuring out how to do it together.
That's a great question, Jake. And we would also love all of your input on it. I don't mind saying that we have a proposal in with the State Coastal Conservancy to help fund some of those wildfire mapping and LiDAR projects. So that would be amazing. And we'll find out when we find out about that. We've tried other avenues, including a CAL FIRE grant that did not get funded. They seem to be really prioritizing acres treated, which is completely understandable. And so we're just still looking for ways to fund that. And just the final little steps, we're hoping that, the governor's budget will tell us a lot more. Most of us are kind of aware of there's some brouhaha going up there. But as far as like individual landowner, my understanding is that that's not a really great way of going about it due to the economies of scale, but I'll let Mark comment on that in a minute. But it is really, we can just we can put together a pile of money and, get this done. So we're all open to some creative funding sources, because this data is just so critical to both the state, federal, local governments. Mark, did you want to, yeah, chime in there?
I would just say like that Paul or Jake, that we have our fingers crossed right now on a couple of possibilities, and and so if that'll just sort of determine the outcome of that will determine our funding strategy going forward, I'd say, and we just hope that we get these, and we should know pretty soon. So anyway, maybe I'm saying too much.
Glad
No,
to hear it. Not letting anything out of the bag. And to the extent that we can provide a letter of support or any form of support,
That's
please,
great.
please let us
That's
know. And
much
thank you guys for
appreciated.
doing this.
Thank you.
actually, I'm going to call you right after this.
Yeah,
Jake.
yeah.
Like, do you mind sending me your number in the chat? Like, just to
Yeah.
me, if you like, I think I might have it, but it'd be really nice to meet you and talk to you about that. We do need some letters of support. Wanted to give a shout out to Dan Turner for getting one in soon from the Fire Safe Council of SLO for, again, those wildfire and LIDAR derivatives. These are just great questions. Any more here? Oh gosh. Thank you, Jake, for your comment. I see that there. Okay, well, we are finishing up a little bit early. Look at us. We were right on schedule, and I am pleased as punch. I just can't reiterate again how amazing it is to work with this team that has all of their pictures on right now. I also really couldn't do this without the help of our neighboring RCDs, particularly Spencer Gordon of Upper Salinas, Las Tablas, and Jamie Tutelli Lewis, the RCD of Monterey County. Just critical help. We've been so fortunate with just great people helping on this. And with that, I think maybe we will give one more shout out. Paul, could you put that link to the quiz in the chat one more time? Because we would really love to hear from you there. And with that, I think we're gonna wrap this call. Last chances. I can stay on all, until 3 and a little bit after if anybody wants to ask any further questions, but I am going to stop the recording. I can't thank you all enough for coming. Thank you. Just amazing work went into this presentation, and I just cannot believe how much detailed, just expert work goes into this and all of the surveys. And one of our goals was to really share that with you today, and I think that we did it. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording and have a great day. I'll stay on if anybody has any other questions.
I think Fred
Yeah,
was gonna.
thank you, everyone.